Phineas Gage, a gruesome but true story about brain science. Horrible accident in Vermont. The most unlucky, lucky moment in the life of Phineas Gage is only a minute or two away. It's almost 4:30 in the afternoon on September 13th, 1848. Phineas is the foreman of a track construction gang that is in the process of blasting a railroad right-of-way through granite bedrock near the small town of Cavendish, Vermont. Phineas is 26 years old, unmarried, and 5 feet 6 inches tall. Short for our time, but about average for his. He is good with his hands and good with his men, possessing an iron will and an iron frame, according to his doctor. In a moment, Phineas will have a horrible accident. It will kill him, but it will take another 11 years, 6 months, and 19 days to do so. In the short run, Phineas will make a full recovery, or so it will seem to those who didn't know him before. Old friends and family will know the truth. Phineas will never be his old self again. His character will change. The ways in which he deals with others, conducts himself, and makes plans will all change. Long after the accident, his doctor will sum up his case for a medical journal. Gage, his doctor will write, was no longer Gage. Phineas Gage's accident will make him world famous, but fame will do him little good. Yet for many others, psychologists, medical researchers, doctors, and especially those who suffer brain injuries, Phineas Gage will become someone worth knowing. That's why we know so much about Phineas. It's been 150 years since his accident, yet we are still learning more about him. There's also a lot about Phineas we don't know and probably never will. The biggest question is the simplest one and the hardest to answer. Was Phineas lucky or unlucky? Once you hear his story, you can decide for yourself. But right now, Phineas is working on the railroad and his time has nearly come. Building a railroad in 1848 is muscle work. There are no bulldozers or power shovels to open a way through Vermont's Green Mountains for the Rutland and Burlington Railroad. Phineas's men work with picks, shovels, and rock drills. Phineas's special skill is blasting. With well-placed charges of gunpowder, he shatters rock. To set those charges, he carries the special tool of the blasting trade, his tamping iron. Some people confuse a tamping iron with a crowbar, but they are different tools for different jobs. A crowbar is for lifting up or prying apart something heavy. A tamping iron is for the delicate job of setting explosives. Phineas had his tamping iron made to order by a neighborhood blacksmith. It's a tapering iron rod that is 3 feet 7 inches long and weighs 13.5 pounds. It looks like an iron spear. At its base, it's fat and round, 1.75 inches in diameter. The fat end is for tamping, packing down loose powder. The other end comes to a sharp, narrow point and is for poking holes through the gunpowder to set the fuse. Phineas's tamping iron is very smooth to the touch, smooth from the blacksmith's forge as well as from constant use. His task is to blast the solid rock into small enough pieces for his crew to dig loose with hand tools and haul away in ox carts. The first step is to drill a hole in the bedrock at exactly the right angle and depth, or the explosion will be wasted. All day, Phineas must keep an eye on his drillers to make sure they stay ahead. All day, Phineas must keep an eye on his diggers to make sure they keep up. All the time between, Phineas and his assistant are working with touchy explosives. They follow a strict routine. His assistant charges each new hole by filling the bottom with coarse-grained gunpowder. Phineas uses the narrow end of his iron to carefully press the rope-like fuse down into the powder. The assistant then fills up the rest of the hole with loose sand to act as a plug. Phineas will tamp the sand tight to bottle up the explosion, channeling the blast downward into the rock to shatter it. While his assistant is pouring the sand, Phineas flips his tamping iron around from the pointy end to the round end for tamping. Black powder is ticklish stuff. When it's damp, nothing will set it off. When it's too dried or mixed in the wrong formula, almost anything can set it off without warning. But Phineas and his assistant have done this 1,000 times. Pour the powder, set the fuse, pour the sand, tamp the sand plug, shout a warning, light the fuse, and run like mad. But something goes wrong this time. The sand is never poured down the hole. The black powder and fuse sit exposed at the bottom. Does his assistant forget, or does Phineas forget to look? Witnesses disagree. A few yards behind Phineas, a group of his men are using a hand cranked derrick to hoist a large piece of rock. Some of the men remember seeing Phineas standing over the blast hole, leaning lightly on his tamping iron. Others say Phineas was sitting on a rock ledge above the hole, holding the iron loosely between his knees. There is no argument about what happens next. Something or someone distracts Phineas. Does he hear his name called? Does he spot someone goofing off? Whatever the reason, Phineas turns his head to glance over his right shoulder. The fat end of the tamping iron slips down into the hole and strikes the granite. A spark flies onto the exposed blasting powder. Blam! The drill hole acts as a gun barrel. Instead of a bullet, it fires Phineas's rod straight upward. The iron shrieks through the air and comes down with a loud clang about 30 feet away. This is what happens. Imagine you are inside Phineas's head watching in extreme slow motion. See the pointy end of the rod enter under his left cheekbone, pass behind the left eye, through the front of the brain, and out the middle of his forehead just above the hairline. It takes a fraction of a second for the iron rod to pass from cheekbone to forehead through and through. Path of the iron bar. Lucky or unlucky, the sharp angle of the tamping iron made all the difference to Phineas. It entered just under his left cheekbone, passed behind his left eyeball, and continued upward through his frontal lobes. It exited his forehead between the two hemispheres of the cortex. The iron's passage left him alive and conscious, but forever changed. This is the face of the man with a hole in his head. It is a plaster life mask of Phineas Gage made in Boston after his accident. It shows exactly what the recovered Phineas looked like a year after his accident. He was 27. Notice the big scar on his forehead. To see what lies beneath the scar, compare this picture of his skull in the chapter Following Phineas Gage.